they're talking about equity and women's rights and famine. We're going to prevent famine. We're going to stop the world from ending. And all you need to do is give us total control of your food. In fact, you must give us total control of your food because otherwise your cows are going to wipe us out. And we're going to
They're
have
going to
total
kill
control.
everyone. I'm Carson Jorgensen. And this is the Carson Jorgensen Podcast. Hey, everybody. One of the questions I'm most often asked when it comes to agriculture is, how do we find your products, or where do we buy local? Folks, the guys at Crofter have been working on solving just that. They've created a marketplace that connects the producers to the consumers. You can get high quality products shipped to your front porch. Also, if you're a producer and you need an easier route to get your product to those consumers, visit crofter.com. Fill out the producer application and become a distributor on that marketplace. Again, that's crofter.com for high quality agricultural products shipped directly to your door. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on the podcast. Today, I have a guy with me. We just met not too long ago here, but I've been fascinated by his work, John Klar. John, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
No, I appreciate it. Before we get started, why don't you introduce people? Because again, you run in some of the same circles that I do, but yet you were new to me. So why don't you introduce yourself? Tell everybody about your books and what you've got going on.
I'm glad to. I've been sort of gradually getting more and more involved in this political thing. I've become kind of a food rights activist here in Vermont because I got dragged into an on farm slaughter battle about 8 years ago. And then I made some interesting allies with Joel Salatin and others. And that led to my run here in Vermont for governor, messaging about farming and fiscal responsibility. Some of that's taking root now. And then as part of that run, I put forward my 2020 Vermont Farming Manifesto. And that was really a pattern to try to help local farms and processing facilities and marketing and distribution of Vermont meats in particular and Vermont agriculture in general. And so after the election, I basically flipped that into a book, Small Farm Republic, which is about why it is that conservatives can lead on the environment by incorporating healthy food and regenerative agricultural methods into their environmental platform. Don't have to give up anything. And it was partly an idea of Joel Salatin's in mind. Joel wrote the forward for the book. And I'm now working on a sequel. That book has been quite well received and I think is quite timely. And my sequel is called Farm Hard or Starve. That's the working title. And it's similarly themed, but it more specifically examines the global food supply and our dependency on it and the uniquely dangerous modern vulnerabilities that we face because of all the very things that have been amazing about our technological advances. And I work in the vaccine area too, so that's part of how I've been involved with. I've been working with Merrill Nass and Door to Freedom, and I'm a staff writer for an outfit called Liberty Nation News, and they're a conservative leaning nonprofit. And I write for American Thinker and a lot of other outfits, and I'm an attorney and I'm a farmer. I do grass fed uh, beef and sheep. So we've raised cheese and or made cheese and milk goats and cows and um, pigs. I didn't milk pigs, but I've raised pigs. So we sort of dabbled in a lot of things. And we raised our kids like you are on a farm, and it wasn't really about the money. And I think it was the best thing we ever could have done for our children. So there you have it: lawyer, farmer, and no vaccines for me. That's, I guess, where I come together right now.
well, you've done it all, and your expertise in a lot of these areas is pretty fascinating to me, and I think it's very timely with what's going on in your country, especially your new book coming out about the global supply chain, and that's something that I've been harping on here now for a little while, and everybody wants to talk about, okay, how the health of our nation has declined. RFK, that's been a big platform of his, how our health in the country is declining and our food, but what nobody seems to be correlating is the fact that as we became a net importer of food in 2023, which also correlates to how we're becoming more and more unhealthy. And you see the trend continuing. And the farther we get away from domestically produced agriculture and the farther away we get from, actually having control of our food supply and feeding our own people, which to me is a national security risk, it is more and more dangerous by the minute that we have outsourced our agriculture to every other country.
Well, addressing that, I think Vermont is uniquely maybe could speak to that. And Wendell Berry is a writer from Kentucky I'm a big fan of. And he talks about how we should be writers, or maybe I could argue farmers, from a place, from a region. Where you farm and where I farm are different. Some people
Yeah.
are in dry, arid areas too. Wendell's from Kentucky. Vermont's an interesting place to farm from because, to answer your question, Vermont is now a net importer of food. And Vermont, and my ancestors here in Vermont, I noticed you, I think, are sixth generation there.
Yeah.
I'm seventh generation here in this hill, and very fresh in our minds is the Great Depression. I grew up, I'm a little older than you, but I grew up around people who survived the Great Depression. There were 27,000 dairy farms in the state of Vermont in 1929. There are now about 550, pretty much consolidated operations. Those 27,000 little farms probably also had a couple of hogs, maybe a mule. They were small holdings, and so if you wanted to trade you want to breed your sow, you could find a boar. All of that's kind of gone. We've become a tourist state. And now our nation, if we look nationally, most Americans, if they weren't farmers, they were tied directly to farms. They were living in rural
Yeah.
areas. So since the Great Depression, when America was about 100 million people, we've gone to about 330 million, depending on how many are illegal, whether you can use that term. And we've
Right.
consolidated into the cities. And as you point out, we're importing more food from further and further away. We're getting most of our food naturally out of that breadbasket of California, Arizona, Nevada, especially our fruits and nuts. We're drawing down our water aquifers. We're destroying our soils. They're eroding at tremendous rates. It's a lot of money being made in food, even though farmers have been disappearing. And we get food more and more from further and further away. So it looks like our food's really cheap and easy and inexpensive, but it's become it's lower in quality. It's got more chemicals in it. Far away shipping means it's maybe harvested earlier or treated with more chemicals, but it's also vulnerable. And when the Great Depression happened, Vermonters, by and large, did all right because they were pretty much already self sufficient. And so that's why my book and this issue, this isn't just for farmers anymore. Rome fell because its agricultural system and food supplies fell. This is an old story throughout humanity, and nations and peoples who have mismanaged their soils until they were depleted and wouldn't produce food anymore. Well, a lot of them don't have civilizations to tell stories anymore, and ours may be going that way if we don't start taking more of an accounting, not just of the dollar value of our net produce, but vulnerability itself, food security, and our soils and our water supplies and our human health and our animal health and our plant health. You know,
Yeah.
our produce even is deteriorating in the nutrient content and trace minerals, all because of cheap food. And cheap food is
Yeah.
ultimately maybe more expensive in health and other costs. And you're right; it's a national security issue, Carson. Sorry to give
Yeah.
such a
No,
long
and I
answer.
tell people, no, no, you're fine. Because I tell people that all the time. In our quest to create cheap food for people, we have ultimately created a system that is not always the greatest. I mean, some of it's still good, but we are under an ever increasing demand to feed more and more people with less and less ground, with less and less people, with less and less time. I mean, everybody wants it now and they want it yesterday, and there is not, you don't get that in ag, and when ag's gone, ag doesn't come back for that exact reason. And so we're seeing this outsourcing further and further. We were looking through the stats the other day. They said in 2012 in the state of Florida used to provide 70% of fresh tomatoes consumed in the United States were come out of the state of Florida. As of this year, 80% of our tomatoes come out of Mexico. This is the type of outsourcing we're talking about that people don't realize and they don't necessarily pay attention to. And honestly, the government has created a system that allows this to happen by not having country of origin labeling and let the people understand that, hey, your food is coming from different places that are not in this country, and yet it's still being labeled product of the USA. And again, here comes the problem with government regulations. I mean, Reagan said it, the most dangerous word you'll ever hear. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Well, that's really where we're at right now. But I want to touch on something you talked about there, and it's in our quest to create cheap food, we've created this system that we have. How do you think? I mean, we kind of know the answer, but how do you think we got here, and where do we go moving forward? That's a loaded question, I know.
Hmm. Well, we've gotten here because we were complacent, and a lot of times there was a sense that farming was a destitute life for dumb losers, which I think we know it's not the case. Especially
Right.
now, farmers that are still here are they had to be quite resourceful and just amazing skill sets. In fact, a lot of our farmers were absorbed in our in World War II and our post World War II industrial economy. They were the ones that
Yeah.
invented stuff. I mean, the square
Yeah.
baler is just an amazing piece of equipment. And
Sure.
so what happened though is really that industrial interests. It's as old as business interests or greed. Industrial interests partnered with government. Wendell Berry documents this well in The Unsettling of America to artificially destroy farming as a livelihood to consolidate profits. And part of
Mm.
this, by the way, isn't deliberate. This is just like so many others have lost their jobs, whether it's UPS or whatever. There have been tremendous advances in technology. And in fact, technological advances have probably displaced more American workers than foreign competition. In the case of food, we're
Yeah.
doing both. We're eliminating the human workers with technology. We're getting it from further and further away. And so how do we get there? Well, fascism. Fascism is when corporations and government, or at least by one definition that I'm using here, cooperate. The fascism means that large corporate interests, whether it's Monsanto, uh, a developer of chemicals in agriculture that is now paired with Bayer, the pharmaceutical company that can sell us the chemicals to cure us from the chemicals that they produce to put in our food. Hey, if you want to gobble up those chemicals, go ahead. But I don't think the government should be subsidizing it. I think ethanol is
Sure.
a boondoggle. I think the cash to clunkers program was a disgrace to the environment. These are scams. People are being told that climate change is so urgent that we have to pursue greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and cow methane so much that we have to spew out forever chemicals that will be in our children's bodies and our children's bodies because they're PFAs and they're generated from the manufacture of solar panels and EV cars and wind turbines. And nobody wants to look at that. So we're polluting ourselves because there are people that cozy up to government and regulatory agencies, capture those agencies, and profit. So whether it's even their desire to kill or wipe us out or sicken us, it surely has been profitable for them. So to unravel that and answer your second part of your question, we can't do it overnight. We shouldn't try to do it overnight, but we want to institute an even playing field. There are billions and billions of dollars being invested to favor large institutional farming operations, which ultimately become conduits for profits to stream up to chemical companies that make things like glyphosate and synthetic fertilizers. And by the way, that's all built on a system of, first of all, a legitimate currency system, which ours is increasingly being tampered with in very dangerous ways. And second of all, cheap and available fossil fuels. And the day that those go away is the day that the illusion of cheap food comes back to haunt, because now the further away your food is, the more your fossil fuel cost is in real monetary terms. That's called food inflation. And so there's an issue of food security and an issue of food inflation. And as you said, maybe we'll come back to it. It's a national security issue, and I
Yeah.
think more and more people are going to see that. And frankly, I call it "watch the birdie." They keep us distracted with things like race and gender and borders, and meanwhile, the siphoning off of our self reliance and our food supplies is quietly going on behind the scenes. And one day they're just going to say, look, you're going to give up your guns and your bullets if you want to feed your kids. And we're a
Right.
nation
Sure.
that's taking our food for granted, and we're going to roll over fast because you can't
Mm.
eat bullets.
Sure. And that's the one thing I've always said, they who control the food control the people. And that's really where we're headed. But you talked about regulatory capture there, and I think that's an important thing that a lot of people don't really understand, nor do they delve into, because to dumb it down as simple as I can say it, these big corporations have the money to lobby. They go to DC, they lobby the people who make the rules. They make the rules so they benefit the big guys and not the small guys. They consolidate the markets. They put the small guys out because they ain't got nobody to look out for them and they don't have the money to fight it. That's really what's happening, because they have the money to spend and the farmers just don't. And that regulation is what is strangling. And for me to roll this back right now, it's going to be a complete regulatory overhaul. I mean, you look at what's happening in the presidential election, you look about what Trump is talking about on a constant basis is deregulate and tariffs. Deregulate tariffs, deregulate tariffs. And that seems to be the answer here in ag for me. If we want to roll this back, we have to roll back regulations, because the regulations that are in place right now are doing nothing but creating an unfair market, an uneven playing field. They're actually giving other countries a leg up on American farmers. And so, for me, what's happening in the fight right now and what's going to happen in USDA is regulatory reform.
So that's a very interesting subject and perhaps has some nuances that we could explore some more. um,
Sure.
because I've noticed Politico and others suggesting that the battle for the USDA under Donald Trump right now is being waged in part behind the scenes by large industrial agricultural systems or players who want to deregulate the industry. And it's this boogeyman. Now, that's very interesting to me because, the ones who want to deregulate are the Amos Millers and the Amish, the people who want to have raw milk, the people who want to have
Yep.
local food processing and slaughter our own animals on the grass we raise them on, like me here in Vermont, people like Thomas Massey. The ones who want more regulations, gee, are the ones on the left, the liberals, who are, I think, working for large corporations who put Mr. Monsanto
Corporations.
back in again under Biden. So it's funny how they put it out as like, well, yeah, those evil Republicans want to deregulate. No, actually, this is a populist movement to deregulate. I want you to keep your
Yes, it
hands
is.
off of my chickens and not microchip every animal I have, like they do in Europe, where they can track all of your sheep, in Ireland,
Sure.
by satellite. They're all microchipped. They have two microchips. And if a sheep dies, you have to pay 35 euros, so about $50 to dispose of that
And
sheep.
report it.
You can't dig
Yep.
a hole and compost your sheep. You have to pay somebody to use fossil fuels to drive to your house and charge you a fire. And if you have 600 sheep, like he has, the guy I talked to, and you have even more than that, you have 4,500 sheep, you have some older ewes, even without culls, you're going to have some casualties.
They
This is
die a
destroying
lot.
farmers. I'm digressing now, but these are
Yeah.
regulations. The regulations. So my next book really takes a deep dive in trying to analyze Europe and what's happened there. If the
Mm.
regulations aren't designed to destroy our food supply, they'll have that effect. Wildlife regulations, my climate change regulations. If it shuts down small farms, and by the way, the globalists are telling us that the solution to our problems is to get rid of the 500 million small peasant farmers and consolidate under industrial agricultural systems, because then you can raise more food in a smaller area. It'll be more efficient. So you're going to feed more people and protect the world from famine. You're going to save the planet from carbon dioxide poisoning. But what are you going to use? Chemicals, synthetic fertilizers, and get rid of the cows and their manure because they
Yeah.
pass gas. It's a scam of huge dimensions. And but so
Sure.
ultimately, the large corporations actually want to regulate. They want to regulate. What do they have? Badgers in England, and you can't shoot a
Yeah.
badger. And
Bovine
they're regulating the
tuberculosis. You'd hit.
crap out of the farmers in Europe, and it's coming to a farmer near you. And you hit it. You don't
Yeah.
reclaim your farmland once you develop it and turn it into suburbia or a parking lot. And there's the big scam again. Here are the two big scams, by the way. I think one is we're going to go after food. We're going to go after cows. We have to go. Agriculture is a serious problem. Go ahead and keep mowing your lawns. 800 million gallons of gas a year in lawnmowers with no pollution control devices. By the way, go after people's lawnmowers and see what happens. They go after our
Right.
cows because, and we won't go after your golf game. We won't go after your skiing chalet or your jets that you take on trips to Aruba. We're just going to go after them cows. And then, by the way, we're going to replace that cow manure with synthetic fertilizers and
Sure.
synthetic meats that pollute the crap out of the planet. So, I sorry, I probably went too long there,
No,
but
no, but
we need to
it's
deregulate.
comical.
And yeah, go
Right.
ahead.
It is comical though what some of the things, because everybody says, "Oh, we're going to go to hydroponics and we're going to go to all these things. We're going to get healthier. We're going to," cuz like you realize what you're actually saying right now. You want something grown with synthetic fertilizers in a smaller area in confined space in a factory setting. That's what you want. That's what you're telling me you want when you say these things. And so I'm with you. To me, it's just simply comical, some of the things that they're coming up with. I mean, it's a prime time to talk about this, actually, what's happening in the United Kingdom right now. I mean, those guys are at it between the French and the English now. They've had it. I seen videos yesterday of them hanging dead boars from the fence at Parliament. I see them blockading the Westminster with tractors. I mean, these guys have had it over there. Their new inheritance tax that they're forcing on these people is simply, they come out and said the quiet part out loud. They literally said, we're going to push these people off their farms because the farmers have been hoarding the land for too long. And I mean, that really is the ultimate goal. They've said the quiet thing out loud, and people have had enough. The farmers have had enough. And I think you're going to see some major change, or else stuff's going to come apart.
Well, so I think there are some fascinating things you've hit upon here to tease it out a little bit. You use the
Yeah.
word comical. It's comical for us because we have insights into food and farming. It's they don't see it as comical because they literally, I mean, when Klaus Schwab and John Kerry get up there and say that we have to get rid of cows, I mean, I think they might actually believe their own. I don't know, but they certainly, it is comical to us, but it's not so funny when they're coming after your food. And there are
Yeah.
some very interesting things about what's happening in Europe. For one, it's resulting in political movements in Ireland, in France, in Holland, and those people are moving to populist parties, and it's actually changing the the directives and plans of the globalists because it's the EU who are answering to the UN, who all have these treaties about how you have to get rid of carbon dioxide. Well, and then they call them far right populists. They immediately start denigrating them as far right. So again, yeah, you say it's comical, but you've got these globalists who are echoing social justice rhetoric, and they're talking about equity and women's rights and famine. We're going to prevent famine. We're going to stop the world from ending. And all you need to do is give us total control of your food. In fact, you must give us total control of your food because otherwise your cows are going to wipe us out, and we're going to
They're
have
going to
total
kill
control.
everyone.
And so ultimately, though, you mentioned national security, and I just want to hit on this. It traces back to the 1974 Kissinger report, when Henry Kissinger put out a report that was top secret for 15 years or more, in which he outlined how the biggest threat to national security was overpopulation in the world, because it would hurt America's industrial interests to have access to foreign natural resources if third world countries were, well, humping like rabbits, basically. Okay. And if you read it, it's a blueprint that has now been extended into the current globalist plan, unelected people, NGOs, more private partnerships, they call it, new banking money. They're at the G20 right now. They're talking about we need more money. We need $1 trillion a year for climate change, climate change, climate change. If you cared about the
Yeah.
environment, you wouldn't be destroying it with lithium and cobalt mines and using coal to make solar panels so that China has to build 2 new coal-fired plants a week so that we can bring down our carbon footprint. And keep mowing our lawns. It's a scam,
Right.
and they're after your food, and it's plain to see. So it's comical to us, but what you're doing is so important, Carson, because we're trying to wake people up, not just because we want to
Sure.
have a job as a farmer, but because we want our children to have food and their children to have food that's healthy, reliable, and secure. And you give up your food,
Bingo.
it's hard to blame other people when you say, "Oh yeah, here, help me, government. Here,
Yeah.
just take it over
Yeah.
for me. Make it
Again,
easy
but you
for me."
look at any of the revolutions of the past, you look at the communists, you look at China, you look at Mao, you look at all of them, and the first thing they did, Always. This pattern was there. They take away the guns and they take away the food. That is always the pattern. And it doesn't always have to come in that order, but one of those two things happens first. And that's what happens. They go after the farmer because, again, whoever controls the food supply controls the people. And I mean, people, they have branded us, again, as you said, far right or conspiracy theorists. But no, this is it. And they have literally said, you will eat crickets and you will like it. That you will only eat meat sparingly. These things are coming from the top down, and that's what they talk about at the G20 when they fly their private jets to Davos. They go over there and they say, you know what, we're going to make sure that these people don't have this. And if they really wanted to have this conversation, let's be completely frank about this. If they really wanted to have the conversation about climate, let's have the conversation, because it's been proven time and time again that agriculture is the only net zero carbon emitter. Why are you coming after us? We take out more carbon out of the atmosphere than we put into it. So why are you coming after us? Because I don't see any other industries that are net zero. So tell me, why are the cows bad? Why are the sheep bad? Why do you keep coming for us? Because it's not about that. Because that is not it. It is simply a means to controlling that. And it becomes very simple when you vertically integrate to be able to cut off the food supply. I mean, a prime example of it here in Utah, the WH group, Smithfield Foods, they came in, they bought up a bunch of the pork processing, they put a bunch of the small guys out of business, they consolidated it all, invested billions, then they shut it down. I mean, they canceled 1/5 of the pork processing in the country overnight because they were able to shut it off. And it cost 800 jobs in a small county here that can't afford to lose 800 jobs. But this is what we are doing. We are selling out our infrastructure. We're selling out agriculture. We are doing all of these things, and yet everybody keeps sitting on their hands because they don't know or don't care to know.
Well, they don't need to until it's too late. It's like a lot of things, the old adage, they came for so and so, and I didn't say anything. Then they came for me. They're coming for your Hormel chili. Smithfield Foods is
Yeah.
a story. I mean, they're Chinese owned, a majority Chinese owned. You mentioned food. Here, we could boil it right down. Look at the story of Jerusalem. In the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, I think it was, when the Romans took them out. The whole idea of a siege was to kill your enemy by famine, all right? And they end up eating each other rather than giving up. It's a bad story. You mentioned our
Yeah.
history. You mentioned Mao and Stalin control the food. Henry Kissinger said so. How about wiping out the bison to control the North American Indians? Now, I
Yeah.
mentioned that story because a lot of this is politicized. And in our current
You're
climate, in our culture, we have an entire generation of people who have been brainwashed into the Kool-Aid drinking idea that communism is a good thing. So a lot of the language of the globalists and even of Henry Kissinger's 1974 report is very familiar language to the Marxist mind. But if you look behind it and go, well, wait a minute, this is Kissinger. This is the mighty, horrible Kissinger, and actually call it out for what it is. And I think that's kind of what Maha has done. It popped the bubble of the whole climate lie. Because by the way, even if we
Yeah.
are warming the climate, making EV cars and solar panels is not the solution. It's making it worse
Nope.
when you look at the true
Sure it is.
externalized pollution costs. So as people start to see the food thing, the Maha thing, you can't coexist. Maybe I'll use that term. You can't
Sure.
coexist with Maha and climate change, climate renewable energy production. They're not coexistent. The EPA has now identified over 12,000 forever chemicals or PFAs. These are horrible chemicals, and what, it took you 100 years to figure out they're bad for us, and now you're gonna start churning them out to protect us from carbon dioxide. What if you're wrong? And don't we need to eat? And so even now we see people came together in this campaign. Well, money counts, the economy counts, being having safety and security of your borders and your towns counts, and having healthy food for your children and grandchildren, and not having baby food tainted with heavy metals, and having the government subsidize obesity drugs and surgeries for your children's stomach so they can keep funneling you with cheap food for profit. It's getting old, and once it pops, I
Yeah.
think it pops the whole climate change issue as well, and the whole globalist cabal collapses around the issue of food.
Yeah.
and its impact on the environment. And you're right, by the way, about cows. You know that
Yeah.
they're the solution and not the problem. You get that. Oh, I want to share something else with you, by the way, and your listeners. I
Yeah.
have a theory, so I want to hear what you think about this. You asked why are they coming after cows. There's a reason why they come after, I believe, in cows and sheep. Again, having done this for years, they already control the chickens and the pigs. All right, they control
Fair.
the chickens and the pigs because they control the entire grain industry. But you have your sheep on grass, and I have my cows and sheep on grass. I don't need your grain. I can go generation after generation using God's solar panels. They're called blades of grass. They don't come from China. They regenerate great when they go back on the earth, and I don't need to give you subsidies that I take from poor people to give to rich people to buy them. And my cows convert these inedible things called grasses right to my plate, by the way, way healthier. And then the whole animal rights thing, we have to get rid of the animals to save them. um, Guess what? The industrial agriculture can never, unless they can patent a cow, because now it has a special kind of digestive tract. So it puts out 14% less methane with its soil building manure, by the way, if you start balancing those. Unless you can do that, you and I are always going to be a threat. We peasant people who don't depend on industrial agriculture for our grain to feed our animals. American population, American consumers depend on the grain supply and the monocultures of soy and corn in particular for their eggs, their chicken meat, and their pork, and they always will. But for cows
Yeah.
and sheep, we could actually adapt, for instance, to an energy crisis. I would suddenly become not only cost competitive with those others' meats, but my grass fed meat, currently a little more expensive, would actually be more cost competitive because I don't have to buy your grain. All of a sudden
Sure.
the entire industry has to shift. So I think that the weak link in controlling the food system is stuff that peasant people like we can raise and have a symbiotic relationship without them patenting it. They've patented the soybean,
Yeah.
they've patented the corn, they haven't patented my cows, and
Yeah.
they're not going to. So I think owning cows and sheep is a revolutionary act.
No, and it's the independent producer, in my opinion, that's standing in the way. And become vertical integration that's easy to control. I mean, as they don't want you to have gas stoves because they want you to have electric ones because they can turn them off whenever they'd like. It goes the same with electric cars. I mean, if you've driven too many miles, they can turn them off. They don't like the independent producer because it doesn't rely on the outside world and you can't shut it down in mass. And people need to understand this, that during COVID, while the shelves were bare. While things were running empty in the stores, the government was running around the United States euthanizing market ready animals, especially poultry and hogs, in light of COVID. While there were food shortages, they were out euthanizing market ready animals because they said we couldn't get them to market fast enough or there was no way to produce them. They were paying the farmers to go into their operations and wipe out entire barns full of chickens, turkeys, hogs. This happened. Everybody needs to know this happened and it happened en masse. And that's what vertical integration gets you. That's what big corporate ag gets you. Uh, that brings me back to another point, and we haven't really touched on it, but that is balance because I would love to see every animal raised holistically in a natural way out. But the way that things are going anymore, with 1% of the population feeding the other 330 million people, it's pretty difficult to make that done on a small farm or a croft or whatever you want to call it. With urban encroachment and everything else we've got going against this, it's hard to do. So how do you see we find that balance between bigger agriculture and small farms and that
Hmm.
holistically raising animals versus, the big corporate farms?
And that's a great question. I think we all need to be asking that question in two ways. One is there's a very interesting contrast and why I've been diving deep into Europe. Europe is different from America in their food and
Mm-hmm.
farming in a few different ways. For one thing, Europeans really like their food. Italians mange, and the French the baguettes, and the British people knock it. But boy, I love roast lamb. The
Yeah,
Germans, the Germans, the Spanish, the Dutch. Everybody's got their food.
the
Americans, we got
food.
McDonald's. We like put it in. Like it's kind of like running my lawnmower. No, we do. We're
Sure.
kind of ahead of them in having relinquished our palates. Our palates have
That's
become saturated with salts and sugars, We have the obesity epidemic to show for it. We've also lost a lot of our
Yeah.
farmers. So I might have mentioned I lived
Sure.
in Europe. I lived in England for years and actually kind of got involved in farming a little bit there. And the Europeans they support their farmers and they have for 100
Yeah.
years. The Irish have an experience called a famine. The Dutch were embargoed by the Nazis, and had a horrible famine and starved to death. That's why they built up such an agricultural system. And
Yeah.
but they've always, if you live there, they have kept their land that's agricultural out of out of development. All right, so this is going
Sure.
on in Ireland right now with the inheritance tax you mentioned. So in Ireland and other places, this is called protectionism. So the globalists are now in this push. You mentioned it earlier. They're saying, well, farmers are welfare recipients. That's right. Farmers in Europe make only 40% of what other people make. So let's take away the benefits and the
Yeah.
favoritism of their land. Let's have them compete. So an acre of land is, $50,000. One he told me I think one was one
Yeah.
point four million dollars for like 11 acres it went for. You can't
Yeah. It's
you
about what it is
you've
here.
now yeah, visit. And so what you've done then is then and then the government, you're going to tax it, right? So now you've
Sure.
taxed the productive value for agriculture out of the land. You actually cannot mathematically make a profit on that land if you either invest that
Bullseye.
much capital or carry the costs for taxes. And so that's what's happening in Europe. Now, in the US, there's an interesting demographic switch. We've been consolidating our farmers for a long time because for 50 years ago, 80 years ago, 20 years ago, farmland, you could sell it to the highest bidder. You got taxed on it for the highest bidder. You didn't get a tax break either, unless you're in, some states have specific tax programs. But absent that, you didn't get that European protectionism, which they're lifting in Europe. So we've already kind of, if you really look at the USDA statistics, according to my look at it, we really have we have a gaping middle hole in our farming system in America. We've lost our
Yeah.
mid-sized farms. We have really big
Yep.
farms, and then we have thousands and thousands of farms that the USDA defines as selling more than $1,000 worth of food a year. I'm sorry,
Hobby
that's
farms.
not going to feed a nation. That doesn't really count. It's great and
Yeah.
all, but what that means
Sure.
is, let's say you have, and it's so imperative for Americans to understand that we need alliances with our consumers. Let's say we wanted to have riots like we have in Europe for our food supply in America. If you're going to leave it to the farmers, we don't have as many of them. They're largely consolidated, and they're not driving their tractors from Iowa to Washington D.C. the way they do in those
Bingo.
European countries. So they need the American consumers to go with them. We need to rebuild our mid-sized farms, and the way to do it is to phase out, not abruptly, the subsidies that are essentially going to large operations, the crop subsidies and the direct and
Yep.
indirect subsidies that are favoring monoculture crops, which are really great and all, but let them, like renewables, like solar panels, and like wind turbines, let them stand on their feet in the free market. And then maybe we
Sure.
could also pare down some of those regulations that destroy small farms. Are you processing in the Christ? Is it Christensen meat? Is that where you go?
We do. We take some of our own, but most of our lambs end up in Texas. Most of ours are processed in San Angelo.
They don't. Yeah. So you sell them live. You have, well,
Yep.
so that would be a chat we could have. But so
For sure.
um, rejuvenating the ability for farmer people who want to get, just like Ireland, but in America, if you're a young family and you want to get into farming and you want to be just viable, you're not even trying to get rich. You just want to make a living. I mean, I know a
You
lot of
can't do
people,
it.
you can't do it. And so why can't you do it? Well, geez, the government's in the way and it seems to be lined up with large industrial interests again. How about we just don't do that
Surprise.
anymore? Right. And so that gets back to the captured agencies, including the FDA, the EPA, and the USDA. Pretty much
USDA.
every
Well,
other agency is captured right now by the wrong people. So
government's
that,
usually in the way.
but I think all we have to
It's
do
like when
is,
you have somebody come over to your place to help you move sheep or do something and they've never been around livestock. They're always right in the way. Like they have this uncanny ability and knack to end up right in the dead zone where they're not supposed to be. Like it's every time they're right in front of the chute off the gate and they're right in the way. And the government seems to be the same way, that they always find themselves right in the wrong spot, perfectly in the wrong spot every time.
Well, again, we take that for granted, and you have to say, wait, wait, don't pet the ram on the front of the head. Don't pet the bull there, anywhere but
Yeah.
there, you know.
Anywhere
And
but
we,
there.
and we know that, and it's like, wait, 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 wait. I said you could pet the animal, but don't tick him off,
Right.
I think it's a good analogy, and we need more border collies. I think I saw from your pictures, we raise border collies too. My,
Sure.
it's weird having dogs that are smarter than you are.
Sure.
Maybe not you personally, but in my case, um,
No, they
you hit upon it again with your analogy though. Why do we have non-farmers defining our farm policy globally? I mean, so in my book, I analyze a WEF plan to solve the world's problems, create all kinds of food, end global warming with a new industrial food system. And the three of the main architects given credit for writing it, one of them is from Bayer Crop Services, one of them is from Zurich Insurance, and the other is from BASF chemical companies. These are the people who, by the way, have amazing technologies they're going to bring for agriculture. They're going to track every bit of food, every morsel, make sure it's socially equitably grown. They've got a program for it. And basically, you won't be able to buy anything unless they tell you what you can buy
and
and
they're
they've
doing it for
approved
your
it.
own good too.
And they're doing it to spew out more chemicals and microchips and all kinds of crap, which they call more industrial technological revolution. Technology is what's destroyed our industry, our agriculture. Right? It's kind of like our
Sure.
medicine. If we get any more technology in it, we're all going to be technologized to death. And
Sure.
repentance means to stop going in the same direction of sin and to turn around and go in the opposite direction. And so, what you asked before, the answer is to repent of our industrial system, not to go after conventional farmers but
Yeah.
to start moving the policies in the way that we bring the entire nation and the entire agricultural industry back home, because the national security threat that Kissinger said was overpopulation in third world nations, our national security problem, our number one national security problem is our own food supply is fragile and could be punctured through any number of means overnight, not just by our enemies abroad, but even by natural disaster calamities,
Sure.
hyperinflation, currency collapse, an electromagnetic pulse, or maybe mean people running the country. Not that that could ever
Yeah.
happen, or the world.
No, but you see that, and I hope that people are starting to understand this more and more. And the voting turnout for this election kind of tells me that people are starting to get that, starting to understand it. And I hope that we can continue to bring this to the forefront, because it's not even nefariousness. I mean, it could be something as much as a natural disaster or a disease or many different things that we are not accounting for, we're not ready for. I mean, you look at COVID and how bad it disrupted supply chains, and how bad even today it still has affected some industries. But as I've said 1,000 times to people, agriculture is not something you rebuild overnight. Yes, with industry and with manufacturing, those things can be rebuilt in a couple months or a couple years. Once ag's gone, it's gone. Once you build a home on a farm, it's done. When you build a subdivision over the back 40, you don't get it back. And this is what we're doing. We're losing 4.3 acres of farm ground in the United States every minute of every day. It's an existential crisis, and I think you hit it on the head. It's time to deregulate. It's time to stop incentivizing farmers to not do anything, because the government does do that with conservation easements and other things. They are literally paying farmers to take things out of production in the name of the climate gods and as a sacrifice to their climate gods, because it's become a religion. The climate agenda seems to have become a religion to these people, and they are becoming fanatical about it. And farmers and ranchers, because they hold a majority of the ground, they have been deemed the problem. And so I think that you touched on it and you hit the nail on the head. We are such a small population as farmers and ranchers that we have to have the consumers come with us. We have to have them understand it. And we have ranchers have shot ourselves in the foot plenty of times about not telling our own story and shying away from talking about the things we've got going on and the issues, but also the good things as well. We've never told our side of the story. We have let the other side define us. And I think that it's time we strike that balance between we have done, what we should be doing, and find that sensible middle. And that's what I hope is going to come out of this USDA appointment. Everybody in the ag world right now is waiting with bated breath. And as of the time of filming this, they still have not announced who's going to be the next Secretary of Agriculture. But it is my hope, after seeing a lot of the people on the list, on the one hand, you have the very far one side regenerative folks who want subsidies for everything, and they are a big push for conservation easements. And then on the other side, you have giant corporate ag, and have all those names. I've seen one name in the middle of Thomas Massey that I keep coming back to, and he seems to be the only sensible middle that we have, which is deregulate, bring it back home, incentivize ranchers and farmers to keep it here, and keep after it.
Well, so I agree with you. If that was a question, I'm being set up because I think that Massey would be the ideal candidate for a lot of reasons. You might call him the baby bear, not too hot, not too cold. But for that very reason, I think he struck panic into those industrial powers that be that we're talking about. And I think, Joel Salatin did a blog about that a few weeks ago. And I think because it came from Joel, who's kind of they're both libertarians. So I think that's a pretty good force right now for our country. A little libertarianism wouldn't hurt us all. But I
Yeah,
think Joel's associated with the organic side of things, and I think it put a lot of fear into conventional farmers that they might come in and do something, dramatic. And I wonder even if that's why the recent picture of them eating McDonald's was to sort of reassure people, no, we're not going to impose a tyranny on you. If you want to keep making yourself sick eating Chick-fil-A, we're not going to take that liberty away from you. Um, Massey would be the middle road for those policies to deregulate, and that really is a threat to people who make a lot of money by having regulations that favor them. The pharmaceutical industry stocks tanked with Kennedy coming on board. The
sure.
um, the big agriculture, the renewable energy stocks tanked when Donald Trump won. The big ag
Yeah,
stocks may tank if they no longer get a pipeline to the American money printing system for their products,
yeah,
because ultimately what we're really subsidizing isn't even food. It's glyphosate, atrazine, and synthetic fertilizers that are, urea is made from methane. Okay, urea is made from methane. We have to get rid of cows. What we really need to do is rally everybody in America who owns a lawnmower or drives a golf cart to realize they're coming for you too. Do you think they'd come after Americans, 90 million cats and dogs who are eating 25% of our meat supply? I thought you wanted to save the planet. Why aren't you going
right.
after lawns and dogs and cats? People are going to be eating their
Pets.
dogs
Yeah,
and cats when they get rid of their cows. Remember what happened to the buffalo, and you don't
yeah.
have 97 million buffalo to rebuild your soils with. You do have 97 million cows. So stop slandering them because somebody put them in a concrete factory. Start looking at what they actually do to regenerate the soil. And it's a no brainer. And that's what we have to do. They don't know. So they're listening to globalist people getting paid a lot of money to sit in a laboratory and concoct some money making system to displace this natural order that you and I live in. We have to explain it to people who don't understand their peril.
No, and you're 100% spot on. And that's one thing that I really have a problem with. And it's hard for me to watch sometimes is you see lawyers, no offense to lawyers, but lawyers who have never been on a farm, who have never had anything to do with it, who read a book once telling farmers and ranchers about soil health. And they act like they're the experts and know everything, yet they've never once participated in it. They've never once been a part of it. They read a book and watched a YouTube video once, a documentary, and they thought, oh, that's great. We need to tell these farmers and ranchers what to do. Guys, we've been doing it for a long time. You come out here in the West, 67% of the state of Utah is owned by the federal government. It is forest land, it's BLM land, really unsuitable for a lot of things. But you look at the forest management between the private ground here and the public lands here, there's no comparison. The private lands are managed well, they are grazed well, the
Yeah.
forest health is good, the grass health is great. I mean, the dirt is phenomenal. I mean, that is what we're doing, but that yet these catastrophic fires are always on public land. They're always starting on public land because they don't manage the forest properly. Regulation gets in the way of forest management, and people don't really understand what's happening. Look at California. Those giant fires they have every year in California, most of those are in places that were historically sheep grazing ground. There were 57 million sheep in the United States prior to World War II. Now there's 5 million. And yet those land in California, that ground isn't being grazed. Their governor is absolutely wrecking agriculture in the state of California. They're making it impossible for them to do anything agricultural related. It's it is a war on agriculture. That's really what it is at this point. But we've got to have more people on our team. But again, it comes back to us to start telling our story, get involved, let people understand. These people who read a book once, help them to understand, and get behind farmers and ranchers who are willing to speak up and talk about it, share the stuff around, become educated on it. I think that's kind of the duty of the people who are eating 3 times a day to do.
Well, and I think it's important also to avoid the false dichotomy between conventional and organic farmers.
Yeah,
They would pitch us just like they're really pitching Americans against one another based on race and gender orientation and what color of purple your nose hairs are. I mean, they splinter us and distract us because we're then immobilized. So,
yeah.
I think it's particularly important. And as Tom Massey, I hope, comes in, or whoever comes into uh, USDA. Frankly,
Let's
if it's
hope.
some of these people, it's going to take a lot of wind out of the sails of this whole
Yeah,
movement. To the extent it's been
yeah,
a unifying movement, I think that you don't deliver on MAHA without delivering USDA. You don't just
yep,
deliver
100%.
HHS. You have to deliver USDA. And if you don't, then I think it's going to take a lot of credibility out of Trump's sales. We've got a lot of people on the
Yep,
left that are pushing to denigrate and discredit Bobby Kennedy and Massey and Trump, who, whether they realize it or not, are working for those corporate entities that they too are sickened by. So, this is a bipartisan effort, and we have to find allies where we can. And there are some Democrats who didn't like the second round of Tom Vilsack by Biden.
yeah,
There are some Democrats who are potential walkaways. So, that's why I think Massey is just such a perfect choice.
yeah,
And Donald Trump promised a libertarian in his cabinet to the libertarians. I don't think he's
yeah.
given them one yet. Massey fits the bill. The libertarians love Massey. So if you want
Yeah,
to look long term towards 4 years from now and a JD Vance presidency, perhaps, then you want to leave your house in order, where you didn't become a Nazi, lawfare, venge questing guy as they've painted, but just the opposite. You might
right.
want to appoint young people, appoint women in your cabinet. Get out of that misogynistic label. Maybe the first female chief of staff ever. The first female head of Homeland Security ever. Do some radical stuff like that, and put Tom Massey in. Because if you
Yeah.
don't, you're going to lose steam. You're going to lose credibility, and the people you most need behind you in your populist movement are not going to trust you anymore. So that's why I'm
No.
pushing hard for Massey. So.
Yeah, and I'm with you too. And like you say, it is a false dichotomy that people keep coming back to, that it's going to be conventional ag versus regenerative ag or whatever. But it's not. You can have both. And I believe that Massey is that fine balance of both. But you said it correct when you said if Trump picks any of these other guys, he is taking the wind out of his sails. You cannot make America healthy again by doing the same thing you've always done, because nothing changes if nothing changes. And if you keep doing the same thing, you're going to keep getting the same thing. And that is in the United States, agriculture cannot survive by continuing to do the same thing that we've done, because everybody is on the ropes. Average farm debt is $1.8 million. These guys, you watch them right and left. They are going out of business right and left. They cannot afford to continue. Interest rates on their operating loans are absolutely throttling them. These guys cannot. We cannot survive, and we have to have people. And I believe if President Trump wants to solidify what he promised, he has to appoint Thomas Massey, because nobody else on that list is going to get it done.
Well, I hope you tell him, because I hope he got the
Hey,
memo. If
hey,
he should have already
I
announced Massey, but yeah.
Yeah,
So
I know we keep going back and forth, but I appreciate you joining me today. It's been an absolutely phenomenal conversation. Keep doing what you're doing, and hopefully we catch up again soon after we get this appointment over.
you too. throughout these battles, it's been great to make acquaintances and allies like you. So we flock owners have to stick together with the herd owners and our customers. So I think
Yeah, I
you've done
bet.
a great job of covering some nuances here, and I hope we can do it again.
You bet, buddy. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you turn on your notifications so you know when we release a new episode. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all soon.